Imagine being stranded in the pitch-black waters of the Bahamas at 4 a.m., desperate for help because your wife has just vanished into the sea. Now imagine finally making it to shore, waking a marina worker, and instead of a frantic search already underway, revealing that your wife reportedly disappeared hours earlier. This is the disturbing mystery surrounding the disappearance of 55-year-old Lynette Hooker. Her husband says it was a tragic accident, that Lynette fell overboard and a lost ignition key left him stranded and unable to get help sooner. But weeks later, federal investigators reportedly seized the couple's sailboat, and suddenly, what first sounded like a heartbreaking accident became the center of a growing criminal investigation. Did Lynette Hooker drown in a terrible accident? Or are investigators uncovering something far more troubling? On the Guilt Ledger, we follow the cases people can't stop talking about, from shocking solved crimes to mysteries still unfolding. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Every crime leaves a record. Tonight, we read it. The paradise of the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas is known for crystal clear turquoise waters and pristine white sands. But on the night of April 4th, 2026, the darkness over Elbow Cay hid a nightmare. At exactly 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, a solitary figure paddled a small 8-foot rubber dinghy into the Marsh Harbor boatyard. The man was 59-year-old Brian Hooker. He was exhausted, wet, and completely alone. When he finally encountered a marina night watchman, he didn't scream, and he didn't demand an immediate helicopter launch. Instead, he calmly explained that his wife, Lynette, had gone overboard. But there was a catch that sent shivers down the watchman's spine. She hadn't fallen in minutes ago. According to Brian, Lynette had plunged into the unforgiving pitch-black ocean at 7:30 p.m. the previous evening. For over 8 agonizing hours while his wife was allegedly fighting for her life in the open sea, Brian had been drifting and paddling in the dark, failing to raise any alarm. When local authorities were finally notified at 4:30 a.m., a massive rescue operation was mobilized. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the local volunteer fire department, and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force scrambled boats into the treacherous waters near Hopetown. They were looking for a vibrant 55-year-old mother of 2 from Michigan who loved the sea. But the timeline they were working with was already dead on arrival. How does someone wait 8 hours to report a missing spouse in waters known for swift, deadly currents? Brian's initial story to the police was highly specific. He claimed that the couple had left the shores of Hopetown in their small dinghy, heading back to their anchored 46-foot luxury sailboat named Soulmate. He told detectives that the weather suddenly turned violent, causing unpredictable seas and high winds to lash at their tiny vessel. In the chaos, he claimed Lynette lost her balance and tumbled over the side. But the most bizarre detail of his story involved the dinghy's engine safety lanyard. Brian claimed that when Lynette fell, the emergency kill switch key was attached to her clothing. The moment she hit the water, the key ripped away from the console, instantly killing the dinghy's motor. Left completely powerless in total darkness, Brian claimed he could only watch as the powerful Caribbean currents swept his wife away into the abyss. To the outside world, Brian and Lynette Hooker were living the ultimate American dream. Originally from Onstead, Michigan, the couple had traded the cold Midwestern winters for a life of perpetual sunshine and maritime adventure. For more than a decade, they sailed the world together, eventually buying Soulmate, a magnificent blue-hulled luxury yacht that became their floating home. They weren't private about their lifestyle either. Under the brand name The Sailing Hookers, Lynette curated an idyllic digital diary across TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Her posts were filled with golden hour sunsets, clear Bahamian anchorage spots, and smiling selfies. She was a woman who seemed completely at peace with the ocean, moving through life with a joyful, rhythmic energy that resonated with thousands of followers online. Just 2 days before she vanished into thin air, Lynette posted her very last TikTok video. It showed a breathtaking panoramic view of calm, glass-like waters in Aunt Pat's Bay, with several sailboats bobbing gently in the distance. The caption she wrote beneath it now reads like a haunting premonition. Not going anywhere for a while. Friends and followers filled the comment section with well wishes, completely unaware that within 48 hours, the woman behind the camera would be gone. This digital footprint is vital to the case because it directly contradicts the narrative of a hostile, unpredictable sea. Local weather data from that weekend showed moderate winds, but nothing matching the terrifying boat-flipping squall that Brian described to the investigators. When internet sleuths and local journalists began combing through the sailing hooker's social media accounts, a deeper, more unsettling picture began to emerge. Amidst the highly curated images of paradise, there were subtle gaps in time and shifts in tone. True crime analysts noticed that while Lynette ran the public-facing pages, Brian was frequently absent from the playful commentary, appearing only as a background figure navigating the ship. The contrast between Lynette's vibrant, active digital life and the cold, silent void that followed her disappearance left her hometown community in Michigan paralyzed with shock. In Onstead, neighbors who watched the couple pack up their lives for the Bahamas couldn't reconcile the happy influencer on their screens with the breaking news alerts broadcasting from Nassau. The digital paradise was crumbling, and the electronic trail Lynette left behind was about to become primary evidence in a criminal puzzle. As the Royal Bahamas Police Force began mapping out the timeline of April 4th, Brian Hooker's story ran headfirst into a wall of eyewitness testimony. Brian explicitly claimed that he and Lynette left the shore at 7:30 p.m. and never made it back to their yacht, Soulmate, because the dinghy engine died immediately after she fell overboard. He insisted he spent the entire night fighting the elements in the tiny rubber boat, miles away from his primary vessel, but multiple independent witnesses on Elbow Cay and nearby Lubber's Quarters came forward with an explosive piece of information that shattered Brian's timeline into pieces. Before 9 p.m. that Saturday night, less than an hour and a half after Brian claims they departed, multiple locals and visiting sailors spotted emergency red flares exploding into the night sky. The tracking of those flares didn't come from the open ocean or a drifting dinghy. They came directly from the exact coordinate where Soulmate was anchored. If Brian was lost at sea paddling a broken dinghy, who was on board Soulmate shooting off military-grade distress signals before 9 o'clock? If Lynette had fallen overboard and Brian was drifting away, the presence of flares at the yacht suggested that at least one of them, or perhaps an unknown third party, had successfully made it back to the mothership. The mystery deepened when surveillance video from a private residence on Lubber's Quarters was handed over to investigators. The camera, looking straight across the Sea of Abaco toward Elbow Cay, captured low-resolution footage of the Anchorage area during the exact time frame of the disappearance. Digital enhancement of the video revealed a small, dark object moving through the water, navigating deliberately toward Soulmate right before the flares went off. The movement didn't look like a boat drifting helplessly without power. It looked like a vessel under intentional navigation. True crime analysts and naval experts immediately began asking if Brian had lied about the engine failure. If the dinghy was functional, and if someone returned to the yacht to fire flares, why did Brian tell the police he was stranded in the dark without power? Furthermore, if he did fire the flares from Soulmate, why did he abandon the multi-million-dollar ship to paddle an 8-foot rubber boat into Marsh Harbor hours later? The flares weren't just a cry for help. They were a smoking gun pointing to a completely different sequence of events.
The hours between 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m. represent a black hole in the official record, a span of 8.5 hours that Brian Hooker has struggled to account for under intense interrogation. According to maritime rescue protocols, the first hour after a person falls overboard is the golden window, the period where survival rates are highest, even in warm Caribbean waters. By failing to alert anyone until 4 in the morning, Brian effectively guaranteed that any active search and rescue mission would become a recovery operation for a body. When detectives pressed him on why he didn't swim to a neighboring boat or use his cell phone, his answers raised even more red flags. Brian claimed his phone was lost in the water during the struggle to save Lynette, yet records indicate that no immediate emergency radio broadcasts were made from Soulmate's high-powered VHF radio system, which can transmit distress calls over dozens of miles even if a cell phone is destroyed. When Brian arrived at the Marsh Harbor boatyard, his demeanor was described by witnesses as surprisingly detached. He was not hyperventilating. His hands weren't shaking with the adrenaline of a man who just watched his wife drown, and he reportedly asked for a place to rest before the police arrived. Local fishermen who operate out of Marsh Harbor immediately questioned his claim of paddling an unpowered dinghy across the bay in high winds. They noted that the wind direction that night would have pushed an unpowered rubber boat out into the open Atlantic Ocean, not inward toward the protected boatyard. For Brian to have reached the marina by paddling, the water had to have been calm, or the engine had to have been running. The 4 a.m. conundrum also heavily involves Lynette's personal effects. When authorities searched the dinghy at the marina, they found it empty of major survival gear, but noted that the ignition system showed no signs of mechanical tampering or force. Investigators began to suspect that the story of the lost key was an elaborate fabrication designed to explain away the massive delay in reporting. If the engine worked, Brian could have returned to shore within 15 minutes of an accident. The 8-hour delay suggested to authorities that someone was deliberately burning time, waiting for the cover of night to completely obscure whatever had truly transpired out on the water. 4 days after Lynette vanished into the sea, the Royal Bahamas Police Force decided they had heard enough inconsistencies. On April 8, 2026, detective squads descended on Brian Hooker's temporary location and placed him under arrest. The official charge at the time of detention was suspicion of causing harm resulting in death. The island paradise had officially transformed into an active murder investigation. The morning before his arrest, seemingly sensing that the walls were closing in, Brian took to Facebook to release a public statement, attempting to control the narrative. He wrote about being heartbroken over the recent boat accident in unpredictable seas, and claimed that despite his desperate attempts to reach his beloved Lynette, the elements drove them apart. But behind closed doors in the Freeport interrogation rooms, detectives blasted his emotional public persona. They wanted to know why Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, was openly questioning his actions. Carly went public with her suspicions, stating to reporters that she had been kept completely in the dark by her stepfather. She asked the hard questions that the police were asking. Why didn't Brian drop an anchor to mark the exact spot where Lynette fell? Why did he leave the area entirely instead of staying in the water to look for her? During his detention, a highly bizarre incident occurred that added a layer of surreal drama to the case. Investigators escorted a handcuffed Brian back onto a police boat to conduct an on-scene reconstruction of the accident in the choppy waters near Elbow Cay. According to his defense attorney, Terrell Butler, the police boat rocked violently, causing Brian to lose his footing and plunge over the side into the ocean while still wearing handcuffs. Officers pulled him back aboard immediately, but Brian sustained a noticeable knee injury during the plunge. His legal team immediately used the incident to attack the Bahamian police, claiming their client was being mistreated and physically endangered. The dramatic dip into the ocean looked to locals like a desperate attempt to create a distraction from the intense interrogation he was facing regarding his wife's final moments. Under Bahamian law, authorities can only hold a suspect for a strictly limited window without filing formal, definitive criminal charges. After questioning Brian Hooker for hours, prosecutors realized they faced a massive legal hurdle. They did not have a body. Without a physical corpse showing signs of trauma, and without definitive forensic proof of murder inside the dinghy, proving a homicide under the strict statutes of the Bahamas is an uphill battle. On Monday, April 13th, 2026, exactly 5 days after his high-profile arrest, Brian Hooker walked out of police custody a free man. His defense attorney, Terrell Butler, held a brief, triumphant press conference outside the police station in Grand Bahama. She condemned the authorities for exhausting the entire legal investigative period just to reach the conclusion that they didn't have enough evidence to charge her client. She emphasized that Brian had been fully cooperative, but reminded reporters of a crucial legal fact. We have not been informed of any evidence that anybody has been recovered. For Brian's legal team, nobody meant no crime. But while Brian was free to leave the jail cells, the Royal Bahamas Police Force made it explicitly clear that he was not exonerated. He remained the primary person of interest in an active, ongoing criminal investigation. The loophole release sparked outrage back in the United States, particularly among Lynette's biological family. Her daughter, Carly, expressed deep fear that Brian would use his freedom to destroy evidence or disappear into international waters on another vessel. The public reaction on social media turned fiercely hostile. Thousands of users flooded true crime forums, analyzing Brian's body language as he walked out of the police station. He kept his head down, refused to answer questions from reporters about where his wife was, and immediately shielded himself from the cameras. He was free, but the court of public opinion had already found him guilty. He was a man trapped on an island of suspicion, and across the Gulf Stream, a much larger, more powerful law enforcement agency was quietly preparing to step in and take over the case. Just when the public thought the case had completely stalled out due to the lack of physical evidence, the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, known as CGIS, shattered the silence with a stunning public appeal. Early in May 2026, federal agents released a series of grainy, long-range maritime photographs. The images did not feature Soulmate, nor did they feature the dinghy. Instead, federal investigators were hunting for a mysterious second sailboat that had been spotted moored suspiciously close to the Hooker's vessel on the exact night Lynette vanished. The unidentified boat had been documented in Aunt Pat's Bay, near Elbow Cay, on April 4th. According to intelligence leaks, the vessel was positioned in a blind spot relative to the main shore cameras, and it departed the area abruptly in the early hours of April 5th, right around the time Brian was making his slow trek to the Marsh Harbor Marina. The U.S. Embassy in Nassau took the unprecedented step of blasting the images across all diplomatic and public channels, begging anyone in the global sailing community to identify the owner or occupants of this ghost ship. The introduction of this second sailboat completely flipped the script of the investigation. True crime investigators began exploring two dark possibilities. First, did Brian have an accomplice? Was the second boat a pre-planned extraction vessel used to help hide physical evidence, or even transport something away from Soulmate under the cover of darkness? The second, even more chilling theory was that Lynette's disappearance wasn't a domestic dispute gone wrong, but a maritime robbery or confrontation involving international actors. However, federal agents leaked that they were treating the occupants of the second boat as critical witnesses who likely saw or heard the definitive struggle between Brian and Lynette. Because sound travels incredibly far over calm water at night, anyone on board that nearby vessel would have easily heard screaming, splashes, or the distinct mechanical sound of a dinghy engine firing up. The frantic search for this mystery ship proved that the U.S. government did not buy Brian's solo accident story for a single second. They were hunting for anyone who could break his alibi and provide the grand jury with the eyewitness testimony needed to lock him away for life. On Saturday, May 9th, 2026, the investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance reached a dramatic, cinematic climax in international waters. For weeks, the luxury yacht Soulmate had sat idle, docked under a cloud of suspicion in the Bahamas. But on Friday, May 8th, the vessel suddenly fired up its engines, cast off its lines from Marsh Harbor, and slipped away into the open ocean, charting a direct course toward the coast of the United States. It was a bold, highly desperate move. What Brian Hooker or his operators didn't realize was that they were sailing straight into a massive federal dragnet. Approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida, in the choppy waters of the Atlantic, multiple U.S. Coast Guard surface ships and elite tactical aviation assets executed a high-stakes offshore interdiction operation. Federal special agents with the Coast Guard Investigative Service swooped in, effectively blocking the yacht's path in international waters. The tactical units boarded Soulmate under the authority of federal maritime law enforcement. During the tense ambush, the yacht mysteriously lost all engine power, forcing the Coast Guard cutter Winslow Greaser to step in and hook the massive sailboat up to a heavy tow line. Images captured by military drones and long-range lenses showed the dramatic sight of the Soulmate being pulled through the Fort Pierce Inlet under heavy armed guard. The multi-million-dollar vessel that had served as the backdrop for Lynette's happy social media videos was now a captured federal crime scene. The Coast Guard officially announced that the vessel was seized as part of an active criminal investigation into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. The interdiction was a clear signal to the world. The United States government was seizing control of the narrative from the Bahamian authorities. They weren't waiting for a body to float ashore anymore. They had intercepted the primary container of physical evidence before it could be cleaned, sold, or destroyed on American soil. The high seas raid sent shockwaves through the legal community, indicating that federal prosecutors were preparing a massive indictment behind the scenes. Now, sitting under heavy guard at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida, the Soulmate is undergoing a forensic strip search by the top maritime investigators in the world. A vessel like a 46-foot luxury sailboat is essentially a floating hard drive of physical evidence. Forensic teams equipped with luminol, advanced DNA swab kits, and high-intensity alternate light sources are combing every square inch of the cabins, the deck, and the engine room. They are hunting for blood splatter that may have been wiped clean, signs of a violent physical struggle, or any indication that Lynette was held captive or injured below deck before she went into the water. Even if a boat has been scrubbed down with bleach, modern forensics can extract human DNA from the deep bilges, the water filtration systems, and the microscopic crevices of the teak decking. Beyond the physical biochemistry, federal electronic technicians are pulling data from Soulmate's onboard GPS navigation plotters, radar logs, and satellite communication systems. Marine electronics track precise movements down to the meter. They will show exactly where the boat was positioned, when the engines were turned on or off, and whether the yacht moved during those missing 8 hours on April 4th. The forensic investigation is also focusing heavily on the black tankini and the blue headscarf that Lynette was reportedly wearing when she vanished. If any of those personal clothing items, or fragments of them, are found hidden inside the ship's hidden storage compartments, Brian's entire story of her falling overboard in a dinghy will instantly disintegrate. Forensic divers are also preparing to analyze the hull and the dinghy's undercarriage for any signs of impact. The ship is no longer a symbol of a dream retirement. It is a silent witness. The Coast Guard Investigative Service has remained tight-lipped about their initial findings, stating only that the vessel remains in federal custody. But the sheer intensity of the forensic sweep indicates that agents are building a bulletproof circumstantial case designed to secure a federal homicide conviction, with or without a body. As the investigation enters a critical phase, the question on everyone's lips is simple. Are criminal charges coming for Brian Hooker? Legal experts analyzing the case suggest that the sudden high-seas seizure of Soulmate by the U.S. Coast Guard indicates a federal grand jury is already secretly hearing evidence in Florida. In cases where an American citizen vanishes in international waters or foreign territories under suspicious circumstances, the FBI and federal prosecutors can invoke maritime homicide statutes to bring charges on U.S. soil. The fact that Brian was released by Bahamian police is now legally irrelevant. The federal government is playing a completely different game. Meanwhile, back in Michigan, Lynette's mother brokenly revealed to national media that Brian has completely cut off all contact with Lynette's biological family. He has refused to answer her text messages, has provided no updates on search efforts, and did not even inform them when he attempted to sail the yacht back to America. This total wall of silence has only deepened the family's conviction that foul play was involved. Her daughter Carly's GoFundMe campaign continues to raise funds to hire private maritime investigators and specialized sonar teams to search the deep mangroves and ocean drop-offs around Elbow Cay. refusing to let her mother's memory be buried at sea. Brian Hooker remains a free man for now, tucked away behind his legal defense team, maintaining his total innocence and reiterating that he is a grieving husband, falsely accused by a hyperactive true crime community. But with the forensic results from the yacht pending, and federal agents tracking down the occupants of the mysterious second sailboat, his window of freedom appears to be shrinking by the hour. History shows that the ocean is excellent at hiding secrets, but modern federal forensics are even better at dragging them into the light. Will Brian Hooker be vindicated by the evidence, or will Soulmate provide the final, damning clues that prove Lynette Hooker's dream voyage ended in a cold-blooded murder? The world is watching, the grand jury is convening, and the clock is ticking loud enough for everyone to hear.